Welcome. Let's talk about the security in the contemporary world. When we focus on the word security, in this session we would first understand what is security. Then we would talk about two different types of securities. One, what we say as traditional security, other what we say as non-traditional security. So as we proceed, we'll understand the difference between the two. To begin with, our first question, what is security? When I say security, it is freedom from any kind of threat. Usually when the word security is used in sense of political science, we connote to national security. So it's the security of the nation. Now when we talk about security of the nation, it incorporates two elements. One is the boundaries, the other is the people. So security for the people, which is part of the non-traditional arrangement, and security of the boundaries, which is part of the traditional element. So under security, we consider the core values which should be considered for a region to be secure, free from any kind of threat, and any time a person fails to do something, what could be the immediate way out that should be taken into account. So security not only relates to dangerous events. When I say dangerous events, what those could be? It could be terrorist events or any kind of event which hampers the national security. It could be an external war, an aggression, a military conflict, or an internal separatist movement. But freedom from all those would be considered as a major part of being secure and safe in a nation. So when there is a situation which is outward, how do we deal with that situation is important. So under traditional security, we focus on two elements. One is the external security and the next is the internal security. Now what's the difference? External security is a threat from aggression. What kind of aggression? It could be a military aggression. So any kind of threat that occurs from military would be what would be known as an external traditional security. Again, we focus on two important aspects. One is how do we limit the war, and other is once the war is there, how do we prevent it. Both of these incorporate part of external traditional security. So when I say prevention of the war, it is known as deterrence, and limiting or ending any war is what is known as defense. These two terms are extremely important, specifically for a kind of objective section what we understand, but the main idea is prevention of war and limiting a war is different thing, right? And that's the basic difference that we understand. One is not to allow it to happen, and that's what is prevention. So we say prevention is better than cure, and that's we don't let war happen and we prevent it. This policy is known as deterrence. The other is we limit the war or end the war, and that is we defend our boundaries, we protect our boundaries, right? Now there are various choices that could be done. One such choice is surrender. When there is an attack or a military threat, what can be done is surrender. Surrender is when you are confronted by a war. The second important is to make sure that the other side is not attacking you beyond an unacceptable limit, right? So identifying your acceptable limits is again important. And the third important aspect is to defend oneself when an actual war breaks out. So when there is a breakout of war, right, in that case, how do you defend yourself? So there are three ways of traditional security, and these are what we understand here. Now we take a very simple example. US actually backed Afghanistan, and it backed Afghanistan for what? It backed Afghanistan for militancy in lieu of its action against Soviet Union, and this was back in 1980s. Later, Osama bin Laden had the 9/11 incidents of September 11 as we call it, on the World Trade Tower, and this made United States repeal its support from Afghanistan. So that's how external traditional securities work. Now, under external traditional security, we focus on two elements. One is building alliance and second is balance of power. When I say alliance building, what does it mean? It means that not only your country, but you develop a peaceful relation with the nearby countries, and that is you have a coordinated action, a coordinated act, and the idea is to defend against the military attack, right? For this, there can be various treaties, and we also aim to increase the effective power when there is an alliance group, right? NATO is a good example. So, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So, if there is just one country, it would face extreme threat, let's say in the recent Russia-Ukraine scenario. If one of the European countries is independent, it could face a threat. But when they are in alliance, they are together, then they have more power, they have more effective power. So any country before attacking would think twice, because they know that there are many countries which are together, the effective power of these countries is higher, and this goes into treaty. So a good example is North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So that's what is alliance building. The next is balance of power. Now, where does this balance of power take place? Balance of power takes place between their country and the other country. And this is to do what? The idea is to build military, economic and technological power. So together, military, economic and technological power can be developed, and this is what is known as balance of power. So it is the power between your country and the nearby other countries. So this is two important aspects of external security. Coming on to the internal security. Internal security, the main idea is peace and order. So law and peace, maintaining good governance in the region is a good example. Now after 1945, United States and Soviet Union appeared to be united, but they could expect peace within the borders. So when Soviet Union and United States were separate, there was a period after Second World War which was known as Cold War. Now this Cold War was the period where US-led alliance actually faced the Soviet Union-led alliance, right? And there was always a fear of military attack. But to check that, what was important? Internal security, internal peace. And this internal peace, law and order comes from the traditional internal security. Now, the Cold War between two superpowers was responsible for nearly 1/3 of all the wars that waged in the post-Cold War period. So 1/3 of all the wars that was responsible through this. And then there have been constant threats within the country from separatist groups. If we talk about LTTE, that's a good example to cite. So there are constant threats from separatist organizations. Similar we have seen in Sri Lanka as well. So those are all threat to the internal security. This actually leads to internal war. It is believed that internal war make up nearly 95% of the conflicts anywhere in the world. The period between 1946 to 1991 saw a nearly 20-fold rise in the case of civil wars, and this 20-fold rise was the greatest in last 200 years. Clear? So that's how we understand the internal traditional security. The next is understanding the security and cooperation. Two important aspects of protecting the country from external as well as internal conflicts, right? So if there is an external threat, a military aggression, if there is an internal threat, a separatist movement, for both of these, two important things. One is cooperation. Cooperation would actually control the amount of violence that exists. The second is building up confidence. That means the rival nations should not go for immediate war. There should be a good kind of confidence that should be built between the nations and between the territories, and this confidence building would actually boost the security measures which are there in the country. Now, so far we had discussed traditional security, but there is non-traditional security. Now, non-traditional security, we understand that when there is traditional security, we talk about territories, we talk about governing institutions, but when there is non-traditional security, the reference are expanded. We are not focusing just on territory. We are not just focusing only on governing institutions. Our idea moves much beyond that. So we focus on human security. We focus on global security. What is included? Under global security, we talk about issues which are global. For example, issues related to global warming, issues related to international terrorism, issues related to epidemics, SARS, COVID, AIDS are some of those examples. So when I talk about a narrow conception, I simply confine myself to violence in terms of security. When I made my concept broad, I say, okay, violence is there, but violence alone is not a problem. Much beyond that is hunger, poverty, natural disasters, diseases, epidemics, and so on, right? So we have numerous other parameters that are part of our security issues. So if there is lack of food production, we have food insecurity. If there is lack of food, there would be malnutrition, which is again a sense of insecurity. So there are various elements which we classify under security. So next question is security for who? So security is for people like us. Now this security for human, which is for the protection of the people. Now whom are you protecting? When I say foreign invasion, with foreign invasion, we are protecting our territories. But it's not just the territories that we are protecting. We are also protecting our people. Why? Because when there is a conflict, when there is a security threat from external aggression or internal disruption, what would happen? Millions and billions of people lose their life. And this is where we need to provide protection to the people, protection from any kind of foreign attack. When I say global security, global warming is a good example. So the sea level would rise from 1.5 to 2 meters, and that would be flooding around 20% of the region of Bangladesh, half of the region of Thailand, nearly inundating the areas of the regions of Thailand. So this is why we understand that there are numerous other security parameters which are beyond this narrow conception of national security or violence or freedom from any kind of threat. The next is, besides what we have discussed, there are again new sources which have come up in case of threats. What are these new threats? One is terrorism. A good example would be political violence. This could be internal, this could be external. Now there could be civilians who are deliberately doing something, or there could be an international attack. All of those would come under one form or the other for terrorism. 11 September, or what we call as 9/11 on World Trade Tower, is a good example to explain terrorist attack by Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda. The next is human rights. Under human rights, we deal with three rights: political rights, economic rights, and social rights. Political rights engross or talk about the freedom of speech and freedom to assembly. Economic rights, as we know, is the right for an individual in terms of economic aspects, and social right is the right for the indigenous groups like the minorities, like the ethnic groups, and so on and so forth, right? The next is dealing with poverty. Now, when we talk about poverty, there are numerous things that we deal with. A good example to quote is the North-South divide, where we say the North being the developed, the South being the developing, there is a huge amount of disparity that occurs. Now, half of the population exists in 6 of the nations. Which are those 6 nations? India, China, Pakistan, Nigeria, Bangladesh, and Indonesia. Now, these 6 nations have half of the population. Again, when you have population flooding, that means if I take a simple example of high per capita income and low population growth, that means that makes a state rich. On the other hand, low per capita income and high population growth would affect the region and probably make it poor. So that is again a major difference. Now when there is extreme poverty situations, what would happen? Migration. Migration means people moving out of the territory. Now what is the difference between migration and refugee is important. The basic idea is, when we follow international laws, migrant is one who leaves a nation on his own will, on his or her own will. However, refugee is one who is forced to leave the territory, right? So, migrants leave the region on their own behalf. Refugees are forced to leave that. Again, what is important is the states are supposed to accept the refugees, and in certain cases they do not, right? So we understand the idea that migrants are not to be accepted. Like, when there is a migrant, that migrant is not forced to be accepted. However, if there is a refugee moving into another territory, that state is forced to accept that person as a refugee and give shelter to that person. The next important aspect is epidemics. Now, when I talk about health issues, HIV, bird flu, SARS are some of the examples. COVID-19 in the recent scenario. When I talk about HIV/AIDS, 1 in 6 in South Africa and 1 in 3 in Botswana is affected by AIDS as a pandemic. We have seen a huge demolition, around 4 crore of the people being affected by AIDS epidemic. However, when it comes to bird flu, there were billions of income which was lost because the poultry supply and the poultry exports were shut down in late 1990s in Britain in lieu of the mad cow disease. Similarly, in 1994, there was Tutsi tribe in Rwanda, and Tutsi tribe faced extinction where nearly 5 lakh people were killed by the Hutu tribes. And this was within weeks that this event actually happened. So there are various other sources of issues that we need to discuss. The next is cooperative security. Now, security is not just by one nation. It is a bilateral issue. So, I provide safety to you, you provide safety to me. And therefore, we call it as a bilateral agreement or a cooperative security that exists between two nations or two countries. Now, this would involve regional, national, as well as global issues. Now, there are variety of players which are part of the cooperative society, and these players are both national as well as international, right? Now, when I talk about national players, those could be the local organizations. When I talk about international players, it could be IMF, World Bank, World Health Organization. There can be various NGOs, for example, Amnesty International. There can be Red Cross, and so on. What is important? All these organizations, be it the national organization, international organization, or non-governmental organization, their aim is to provide cooperative security, a security which aims to provide security through non-traditional means. That means it's not just focusing on the violent issues, but on the broader concept of hunger, poverty, health issues, and so on and so forth. And the last is, what is India's security strategy? So India actually follows fourfold security strategy. The first among this is conflict with the neighbors. Now, when I say conflict with the neighbors, India recently had major wars with Pakistan, China, and therefore we need to maintain a friendly relation with the neighboring countries. The next is disarmament and decolonization and no first use policy. That means we won't be the first person to use the nuclear power. When Jawaharlal Nehru was the Prime Minister of India, he called for the solidarity, called for decolonization, disarmament, and in the UN, an international conflict forum was established, and that forum dealt with the problems that could be used for settlement. Also, we are focusing on the NIEO, that is New International Economic Order. The next is militant groups. Internal security is again important. India is constantly facing issues from separatist groups, militant groups which reside within the country. These are exceptionally active in the regions of Nagaland, Mizoram, Punjab, Kashmir. Now these extremists actually need to be the problem need to be resolved in order to maintain the integrity of the country. And the last but not the least is to rise the country from the shackles of poverty, misery, and make India an important economic power in the days to come. This all are the fourfold strategies that India actually follows for its security. So in this lecture, what we have taken is mainly the security measures, the traditional, the non-traditional security measures, and within the non-traditional, we have seen that it is much more broad rather than the narrow conception of violence. It includes numerous other parameters that needs to be checked. So that is what we need to understand for this lecture. If you have any questions, feel free to post those in the comment section, and feel free to leave the feedback in the comment section as well. Below are the links for your reference. Have a wonderful day ahead.